Good afternoon. Hopefully you can hear me. This is the AMC seminar series, part 3. And this evening we've got Pauline Newlove to talk about design for manufacture. Pauline has an interesting background. She's from Denmark. She married an Aussie. This is her 3rd tour of duty in Australia. So she's working at Hydrix as a program manager, and she's got a master's of mechanical engineering with design and innovation as a major part, which she got in Denmark, with a big focus on user-centered design. So over to you, Pauline. I'll let you tell us about design for manufacture. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that. All right, so as John said, my name is Pauline Newlove. I work for a consultant company called Hydrix in Melbourne. We do product development for companies all over the world, anything from front end all the way to production. And as such, we do a lot of design for manufacturing in our everyday life as we are working on several products at any given time. So what I'll be talking about today, let's just get it here. So I think we have around 20 minutes, 30 minutes. So we'll start with what is design for manufacturing, get into some of the details of when to start considering design for manufacturing, the implementation of design for manufacturing considerations, and then end with some key takeaways the few things that I think you have to remember as you walk away from this presentation. I think John said we will do questions at the end, so apologize in advance for all the monologuing I'll be doing over the next 20-30 minutes, but I hope to get some good questions afterwards where we can listen to someone else than just me. All right. So what is design for manufacturing? DFM is a design technique or an ideology aiming to find the most effective way to produce a product. Despite its name, it really requires involvement from many different disciplines. There's the obvious, which is, of course, is engineering and manufacturing. But if done right, it should involve input from the very start of your development, from your marketing people and regulatory and procurement. So a lot of different people should be involved in giving the input you need to do a efficient design for manufacturing. Really, the goal of DFM is to optimize the design in a way that minimizes the complexities in the manufacturing process. Hereby you eliminate waste, such as production time and the material, and you get to generate a consistent high quality output. The outcome of your design for manufacturing activities should really be a high quality, cost efficient product that's manufactured effectively and with little waste. So it looks like I've gone purple, so bear with me as I just restart my video. There we go. Yeah, so really that's when we think about design for manufacturing, you have to think about it as a technique and ideology that soothes through your entire development. So just to put some context to that, if we look here, I mean, in any company, you have a stage gate model. So I'm not that shows sort of how you develop things through the different phases. Not going to go into a lot of details around what that is, but I guess I've taken a part of I've simplified and taken a part of the Hydrix stage gate model and shown here we have a 5-stage model, but it's really in the first 3 stages. So the early feasibility, concept development, and the detailed design, where we employ design for manufacturing principles. I really want to put a point to that design for manufacturing should not be a last checkpoint before you go into production, or before you produce the final devices that you're going to use for your verification. There's a reason why we call it an ideology rather than just an activity, because it really should be part of your engineering DNA. Because if your base modeling don't have design for manufacturing considerations in there, when you actually get to the stage where you're ready to start making your production parts, if you only start employing DFN at that point, you're very likely to have a considerable amount of redesign. That means you will have to redo some of the activities you did in your concept development stage. So really what you want to try and do is in the early feasibility, where you are starting to define your key requirements, the environment, the products being used, that all gives really critical insights into your considerations for design for manufacturing. It gives you input such as volume expectations. How many products are you expecting to sell? That has a big impact on which manufacturing process you end up choosing and what materials you end up choosing. The same with the environment where the device is going to be used. That all has a critical input into what type of materials, the strength and robustness of your materials. And then this is also where you start doing your basic design configurations and architecture. So really the modules of your design, how you're going to divide different functionality in your design, all gets, the baseline of that gets decided in your early stages. So you want to make sure that you have someone either in your team or in the review process as you go through the review of your design that can give you some insights into that's required to make sure that your design follows some good design for manufacturing principles. As you get into concept development, it becomes a lot. So in the early feasibility phase, it's not necessarily specific things that you put into your CAD, but as you get into the concept development, it becomes much more like that. This is also where you want to start looking at, depending on what your design looks like and what type of materials are required and what type of manufacturing processes, this is where we recommend that you go and start talking to manufacturers. And as a minimum, by the end of a stage 2 or that this concept development stage, before you go into the details of design, you should have your supplier selected. You should have your first quote, so you can do that. So as the first thing in stage 3, you select your suppliers and really start that engagement with them as you're detailing your design. If you can get it in earlier, if you have a manufacturing process where you can use your final suppliers earlier to do the prototypes, that would be recommended. It's a really good way of starting the communication and setting up, getting some good lessons from the manufacturers you're going to be using for your production, and minimizes risk in your later stages where sometimes we find out, oh shit, this is not the manufacturing partner that I hope it would be. They're not communicating in the right way. They're not quick enough in how they give your input. So this is where, getting that, the early you start de-risking some of the relationship, but also de-risking, I guess, the design by getting the input, the better. I guess, depending on your product, and the criticality of the manufacturing process, there will be a difference in how early you need to involve manufacturers. So there's always an evaluation depending on the type of product and the criticality of the material selection and manufacturing process in when, how early or how late the final manufacturers get involved. But as I said before, you should really have someone in your team or someone that can come in at review points, whether it's a manufacturer, whether it's a consultant, to review your design against design for manufacturing principles and give those insights into the considerations that need to be taken into account. So you make sure that you're not testing and refining a design that will never be able to be produced. So I guess there's design for manufacturing as an ideology of and getting all the insights and input that you need as throughout the process. And then there's a design for manufacturing, formal design for manufacturing activity in the end, where you then, with the selected supplier, go through all the details of your design. This is usually where the supplier will spend a significant amount of time in doing mold flow analysis, for example, if it's an injection molded part, and doing some of that analysis that gives you those final adjustments to a design. Before that, though, manufacturers can give there's some design principles that, you know, we should all learn, but there's also, you can use the manufacturer to just give high level input in where they see any issues. So there's different steps along the way, depending on your design maturity, where the involvement of manufacturers is more or less, and you can utilize their expertise in different ways. So implementing DFM. If we look at the overview here, there are really three main things to design for manufacturing. There's the design itself, the material selections, and the process definition. All the other things that are shown here, such as the input in that iteration cycle and the output you get out, that's the output of this, of course, the whole purpose of why you're doing it, and the input is what defines some of the decisions you make around your design, material selection, and in turn your process definition, and all that. You know, there will be several iterations of that as you get more and more, or as your design matures along the way in your development process. Here again, manufacturer input is critical along the way. Again, when you start getting it, depends a little bit on the expertise you have in-house or anyone you have as a support group. But again, as I said before, the final, there will always be differences between manufacturers. So as such, if you can involve the final manufacturer in your prototyping loops sort of earlier in the process, it's a really good idea, because you get some good insights, and that's catered to their specific capabilities and where they can maybe and they can help you identify areas that will have significant impact on part quality and cost. So what goes into developing a suitable design? There's a lot of considerations to keep in mind when developing for DFM. There's the generic things of your system requirements and your stakeholder requirements that all goes into developing a product that has the performance and the functions that you need to address that gap in the market that you're trying to make money off with your new invention. Specifically around design, there's a big difference in the volume, the sales volume you're expecting. Do you expect to sell, in the hundreds every year for a certain period, or are you expecting to develop in the thousands per year or hundreds of thousands per year? That has a big impact in both how you plan your development, because if you want to drive down part cost, it takes a couple iterations, and therefore there's some development cost that goes into that. But if you have a really high volume, that becomes really important, because the part cost has a much higher impact. If you have lower volumes, well, then again, it's about thinking, okay, what is a good level of manufacturing insights in trying to drive down cost by making the device simpler and easier to manufacture. So there's some strategic decisions in the very start of your project that puts a scale to how much development effort you put into try and drive part cost down. And again, this goes hand in hand with the part complexity, because when you throw something together quickly in CAD, more often than not, you just make the details and the function as you need. And there's likely to be, design features that it's likely to be a little bit more complex than something that you have reiterated and then thought about different and smarter ways of connecting things. So there is, again, this thing about what is this expected sales volume, what is your part complexity, and how much effort do you go into try and simplify a part? Because one thing is making a design that works. Another thing is really simplifying a design in a way that takes out a lot of features. That takes a lot of time and effort, and you really want to make sure that the time and effort you put into the development to try and simplify something has the expected result in the end, either through a part cost that makes your business case more viable, or there's the general things around design. You also need to make sure, as you go through the iterations and you get, you start having an idea what type of manufacturing process you're going to use, that design needs to conform to the expected manufacturing process. I'll give an example a bit later with some of the consideration that goes into something like an injection molded part, because it really drives some of the features that you'll end up having in your design to try and simplify the molds that you're doing. As always, if there's something somewhere that already works, that exists, and is of the right quality, copy, get inspired by design that's already there. People have put a lot of time and effort into the designs currently on the market. So if you can take some of those learnings and make them quick by using similar design in solving sort of basic things in your design, that means you have more time to look at the unique things that is critical to your specific invention, and all the things that have been done a million times before, such as buttons and things like that. Copy things because other people have tried and tested that. And that gives you a head start. You really want to make sure that you're spending your effort where you're providing something new. Don't spend your effort trying to invent something that has already been designed a million times before. And then, as always, the tolerance precision is a key driver of part cost. Be very careful in just saying, oh, I'll do really tight tolerances because then I know it's going to fit. Where you can, try and have as wide as possible tolerances that still gives you, of course, the performance and the functions that you need in the quality that you need them in. So really be careful when you put tolerances on, because this is some of the things that will drive cost up, whether it's a machine part, whether it's a molded part. This is where the manufacturer will have to spend a lot more time if the tolerances are tighter, and as such, it will drive cost up. It's also where they will have to check that things are in, whether they're in specification or not. So like if they're very tight, there's likely to be a bigger scrap rate for them, and they will put more cost onto the part and the tooling. So really be mindful of the tolerances that you put on your design. Again, there's some general sort of bandwidths that you have for different sizes, different manufacturing process, and different sizes of parts that can be utilized as a good sort of starting point. And then I think it's that interaction with the manufacturer where you then go in and have a discussion about what is actually, where are there some critical things where those tolerances create extra work for them, and is there any options of trying to widen the tolerances in those areas. If you talk about selecting the right material, again here, I won't get into very detailed here, but there's a lot of different material considerations that comes into account when setting up a good design. It's really choosing the material will also have a big impact on what type of process, of course. So you really need to have a good understanding of your requirements and the needs of your users for the device that you're developing. So where's the part getting used? How is it getting used? That will define sort of the mechanical properties, strength, durability, thermal properties of the material that you're looking at. There's things such as optical properties. You know, can it be reflective? Should it be transparent? Shouldn't it reflect at all? Especially if you're doing anything with optics, your materials become critical in your optics functioning in the right way. So you really want to make sure that you have a clear idea of what your requirements are and how that material selection affect your requirements. Now, then there's resistance to chemicals. You know, if you're doing anything in medical devices, all those devices will have to be cleaned. If it's an instrument, if it's a consumable, well, it's likely, and it needs to go into a sterile area. It needs to be sterilized. So it needs to be able to withstand the specific sterilization process. So all these requirements become critical for the choice of material. And then again, that then can be very critical in the manufacturing process chosen, right? There are things such as flammability, there's appearance. So do you need any specific colors or surface finishes, either from a performance perspective, but also from an appearance perspective? There's the regulatory requirements. So do you need a medical grade, surgical grade, implant grade? I'm currently working on a project where we're doing a surgical implant, and here the steels that we're looking at have some very specific requirements. And actually one of the challenges we had here was then actually finding a supplier that would manufacture anything in that specific implant grade steel that we're looking at, because it's not an easy material to get. So this is, again, if you have critical things in your material selections, for example, this is where you want to start getting your manufacturers involved early, because it can become a showstopper if the suppliers can't actually access the material you're looking for, or can't solve the problems through the material. Maybe you have to find a different way of solving it, and you want to know that sooner rather than later. Then there's things like if it's a device that includes electronics, the electrical properties, is it an insulator or a conductor? And there's also, electrical standards compliance, EMC compliance that requires some specific materials to surround electronics. So there's all these considerations that will dictate, I guess, the type of materials that you get to choose. Then there's usually, with a lot of the different materials, a specific supplier will have specific vendors that they go to for the raw materials. And therefore, you want to, when you've selected a supplier, you want to talk to them and get their recommendations on the specific material you're going to use. And that's why, again, you need to be very clear if you need anything like a medical grade or surgical grade material, because this can limit some of the, I guess, the possibilities that, or your options in manufacturers, because not everyone is willing to go and source new raw materials or can find the raw materials because it's not sourced, or they can't get it from their normal suppliers, and they're not interested in necessarily go and finding the suppliers that can provide them with that material. So again, if there's things like this that are critical for you, and if you're in some of the sort of outlier areas of normal materials, get the manufacturer involved early, because it can be make or break on whether or not you can actually solve your issues and whether the supplier selected is the right one. Also here, because if the supplier do have the material you need in stock, it's much more likely that they will get it at a better price, so it can drive costs down, and also they won't have to buy it just for you. And so if you only need 5 parts, they still have to buy, if it's a plastic part, there's a minimum, quantity that they have to buy the raw material in, and you will have to pay for all of that, regardless of how many parts you get made from it. So it becomes much more cost efficient if you can choose a material that your selected suppliers already have in stock, and that they're using in other places. Both, it will likely to give you a quicker turnaround time, but also a lower cost. Choosing the right process. If we talk about plastics, I mean, you've all seen 3D printed machine plastics, injection molded parts. I have an example here. This is a product we just put in production, I think last month. This is the top cover of a device. And as you can see, the differences in a 3D printed part versus the black one is the machined plastic part, and the blue one is the final that's injection molded. Again, here, in different times of your development, for cost and time reasons, you may choose different processes to create your parts, which is fine. I mean, as you can see here, we clearly did that. Just note that it does create, so when we went from the machined plastic to the injection molded plastic, we were very aware that the machined plastic was a step on the way. So we had designed it with injection molded principles in the design that allowed us to easily modify it to an injection molded part after we had tested the machine part. So again here, regardless of how you're prototyping, you want to make sure you're setting yourself up for the end goal in some of the design decisions you make, and especially the design decisions you make in your part design. Because if we look at injection molding specifically, again, I have the 3D printed part, which is the pale gray one. You have the black part, which is the machine, and then the blue one. This, as you can see, it looks very similar, but there's some design principles that have been put in from the very start, which was, in injection molding to try and drive keep the tool simple, which is a big part of the cost. You want to make sure you just have everything in the same line or draw. So you just have the two halves of your tool coming apart, and then that creates your part. If you can do that, that means it's a lot simpler, and the cost will be a lot lower compared to if you have sliders or inserts coming in from the side, and therefore you have several different steps in releasing a part from a tool. A couple different things when doing injection molded parts, sort of rules of thumb. It's around keeping a consistent wall thickness and use simple transition between the wall thicknesses, which will allow for more consistent and quicker part cooling. Again, minimizing the time it takes to make a part. Ensure you have the appropriate draft angles on your part. Again, here, allowing the part to easily come out of the tool. Avoid or limit undercuts of features that require inserts. Again, here it's about trying to keep all the features to be able to be molded in these two, in the direction of the two halves. If you do need undercuts, I don't know if you can see my screen, but I have the part here. Try and have cutouts where, one side of that undercut is molded by the one side of the mold, and the other side of the undercut is at the top side of that feature is molded by the top side of the mold. And that means you can still have, so for example, here we had to have some protrusions to hold our buttons in place, but we still managed to get that done in just a two-part mold by having cutouts that allowed us to mold the features in either side of the mold. Add corner radii where possible to avoid stress concentrators. And I said before, specify the loosest tolerances that will keep your part at the required quality. Again, work with your manufacturer to understand the specific details that makes a difference to the quality and cost of the specific part. Finally, finding the right supplier. I think again here, as always, in your development process, and when you've decided on what type of manufacturing process you're going to do, reach out to a couple of different manufacturers as a minimum. Get the quotes, send them your parts. They will send you quotes back, and then make sure you make a face-to-face meeting with them, because one thing is part cost and turnaround time that they will provide you in the quote. But one thing that can cost a lot of time and impact, I guess, the quality of the relationship significantly is the communication you have with them. So if you're we use several manufacturers overseas, which is fine. But one of the things you understand really quickly that when you set up a meeting is their language skills. Can you actually communicate with them efficiently? Will they tell you if something looks wrong and come up with alternative solutions? Or will they just say, yeah, we can do that, and then just give you a high cost? You want the type of manufacturers that actually give you critical feedback so you can optimize the design to try and lower the cost and make it more efficient in manufacturing. There's also the tools they have for evaluation. Some, especially when you go into injection molded parts, some manufacturers has a part of their service that they provide and it's included in their quote. Some people don't, it's an add-on. So make sure you're, when you're evaluating different quotes, that that it's the same thing. You're comparing apple to apples, that they're providing the same type of tools. And then again, typical certifications to look for if you have some specific requirements. I think as a minimum, you want ISO 9001, which ensures they have a quality management system. If you're doing medical devices, they have to be 13485. So, you'll have to look for that. And then there's things like environmental management and occupational health and safety management. You want to make sure that they're treating their employees properly, and you can look for a certification such as ISO 45001. So that gets us to the end. Key takeaways. As I said before, design for manufacturing is a design ideology, not a final checkpoint in your design detailing. The scale of your design for manufacturing optimization effort really should meet your business case. So make sure that, you know, the cost target you set for your cost of goods is a realistic one, because the amount of effort that goes into driving down cost can be significant in your development effort. So you want to find a level that's good enough for your first device, and then potentially do a second version after you have something that's already in the market creating revenue that you can then update and optimize to get that lower cost. You want to choose your manufacturers carefully. As I just said, cost should be measured in more than just the quoted part and tooling cost. The communication is key here. Even things like just take a note of how quickly they respond to any inquiries you have, because that can put a significant impact on your development time. So even though they say they can make a tool in, let's say, 8 weeks, if it takes them 3 weeks to get back with design for manufacturing information, and when you respond to that, it takes them a long time again, then you have a big chunk of work before you even start your tooling that now has extended your development time significantly. So that turnaround time in response, and also the type of response you get and how easy it is to communicate should be key input into selecting a manufacturer. Again, where you can, involve manufacturers early and often, I guess, at different review points as you're changing your design. If possible, try and get some review inputs to ensure that the changes that you're implemented are following the design for manufacturing details required for the specific process. And that's, again, if you have engineers in the team with design for manufacturing ingrained in them, you have a significant head start already. And then simplify where you can, avoid complex features, specify the widest tolerance possible for the quality required, and copy existing quality designs where possible, especially for things that have been done a million times before and is not a part of what makes your device innovative, right? If it's just a function that needs to be fulfilled, copy something that already exists that you like. Don't waste time in trying to invent something new. All right, that's it from me. Any questions?
So thank you, Pauline. That was great. I asked people to put questions into the Q&A, please, and we'll be monitoring that. You spoke about your volume, the impact of volume, number of products you're making in your design decisions. But what happens if you're planning to start small and then grow, gradually grow the product, production rates over time? Do you design for that, or do you have to redesign as your load increases, volumes increase?
So it sort of depends. I guess if you start with a low volume and you're choosing, let's stop share here. So if you're starting with your low volumes and you're choosing a manufacturing process such as machined plastic parts, there's of course some considerations you have to take into account, or design for manufacturing considerations you need to take into account to make a machine part. That doesn't mean that where possible you can't have, the future considerations in mind. So if in the near future it's going to be injection molded instead, you can, where practical, implement, making sure that most of the features can be done or it can be molded in a line of draw of the two halves of a tool. But if it's not practical, I wouldn't kill myself or spend the time in designing for something that is maybe down the line, because more often than not, especially if you're a startup, you want to get that first product out, and you want to get it out at a quality that's good enough. It doesn't necessarily have to be as low cost as you want to get in the end, and therefore, as long as you plan for that design iteration it takes to update the design, you can do that. But you just need to be a little bit careful, because if it has big implications to anything in your performance, or the functionality of your device, you just need to be mindful that that iteration is maybe not the best path. Maybe you want to just, even though it's a higher part cost, maybe you want to keep at this low volume process that you chosen. For example, if you're doing injection molding and you can do it in these aluminum tools or lower steel grade, which is a cheaper tool, but it probably will make around, let's say, 10,000 parts, right? Compared to a full scale injection molded tool, which will make hundreds and thousands of parts, right? So that's probably a lot easier to transfer from one to another. It's more if you go from a very different process to another, you need to you can put some considerations in, but it's unlikely that you'll be able to get away without having to redesign.
And look, I will ask another question. Can you talk about the impact of, say, and this is specifically around a medical device, you plan to use a local contract manufacturer for, say, phase 1 and phase 2 production, but then you're planning for phase 3 to, let's say, go overseas and do production somewhere else. What are the implications there, specifically in the medical device space, where you've got to have, designs and everything going through TGA and FDA and all that sort of thing? Can you talk through that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different considerations. Again, if we're talking about injection molding, every time you move a tool from one site to another, for example, we have several development or manufacturing partners where they will make the tools overseas and then get the tools imported to Australia and then produce parts in Australia when they're ready, when the tool has been approved, because it's a more cost-efficient way of doing it. And in that, so there's a whole process and tool validation setup that goes on in let's say it's in Malaysia, but then when they transfer the tool, they have to do that again because it's the process equipment is different. So it's not just transferring it and it's go from day dot. There is a new validation of the tool and a validation that it is actually providing you with the parts within at the specification that you have that you require and that you put on your drawings. If we talk about medical devices, we get into the whole who's the legal manufacturer question and who that. So there's some complexity around that depending on who you have designated as your legal manufacturer, because if you start changing that, then it changes, I guess, the approval of your device, and there's some regulatory activities you then have to go through to get a new approval. So it depends a little bit on what you're doing. And then I guess if you're transferring to a different company, they may have different vendors, and as such, you have to get the certification of the raw materials that it's to the specification that you require for your medical device.
Okay. Well, look, I'm going to ask one last question.
Yeah.
Is it becoming more common that you're being asked to design for a circular economy sort of product, a product that can be perhaps reused or reutilized? Is that becoming a more common feature?
We are not actually seeing it that much yet. Running low on battery here. So I think it is a trend that's coming for sure. I mean, we know that in everything else we're doing, sustainability becomes a big thing. It's not something we have had to deal with a lot yet. I think making products as a platform is a specific type of company. You're in a specific place in where you are in your development. You don't necessarily do your first device as a platform background because you don't necessarily have the knowledge you need on where the opportunities lie, so where you want to go. We did it in radiometer where I worked when I lived in Denmark, where we had a range of different blood sampling syringes, and we were going to do the next generation of that. And because we had a lot of knowledge in the area and we already have some different devices, we then started the platform to try and get the commonalities to make sure that we could reuse the different parts in I guess something that would support our portfolio down the line. Okay. But yeah, we work with a lot of startups and very early development. So as such, in that platforming space, we don't do too much at this point.
Yeah, I can understand a startup isn't too concerned about circular economy. Look, we do have a couple of questions. Sorry, Ray, I missed one from you. If you're targeting manufacture in Australia, is there anything you would specifically recommend for that scenario?
We have several different manufacturers that we work with, but it depends on what type of manufacturing process we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And what type of device. Is it a medical device? Is it an injection molded part? Is it a metal part? We have a lot of clients that require that we use Australian-based suppliers. The device you saw in the presentation, that's all. That client wanted everything to be produced in Australia, I guess, as much as possible. There's some electronic components that just don't get made or aren't made in Australia. And also, I guess the tool itself, as I said, got made overseas, but then the parts are getting produced here for the injection molded parts. So we have a lot of clients that require that. And as such, we do have some partners we use for different things at different times. Yes. So